The U.S. is making it harder for other people's stuff to get into our country. On the other hand, they're saying, look, we want you, Australia for one, Japan for another, to increase spending. So you all got to spend more on your own defense. And this is a good time to, I think, bring in what's going on with Anthony Albanese, who's up in China right now. Status quo over Taiwan. And you've been writing about what seems to be becoming a bit of a crisis in U.S.-Australia ties. And this is with the Trump administration pushing Albanese to increase his defense spending up to 3.5% of GDP and getting a fair bit of pushback.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think the U.S. is overplaying its hand, in part because this debate is playing out in public before Australia has had time to air it out in public in Australia and have greater political buy-in and what I would call social license from the Australian public around a much more pronounced and forward-leaning security posture for Australia. I wrote an article a few weeks ago in which I used the word crisis and U.S.-Australia alliance in the same sentence. I never in 25 years thought I would ever do that. But the reality is that a lot of people think that because Australia and the United States are both ambivalent about the rise of Chinese power, that makes operational coordination in the alliance easy. Actually, it's the opposite. It sharpens a lot of the contradictions. I'll just give you three off the top of my head. One, the United States, as you just implied, wants Australia to pre-commit to using its forces and also assets in Australia to potentially fight China around Taiwan. Australian governments do not outsource sovereign choices about where Australian military assets can and can't or will and won't be deployed. And the U.S. overplays its hand because the politics in Australia are not ready for that. Second is the geographic locus of conflict. The U.S. is focused on one scenario in the Taiwan Strait. That's the preponderant focus of U.S. war planning. Australia has traditionally been focused much closer to home. That debate has not really developed in front of the Australian public or even in the Australian strategic class sufficiently. Finally, as you said, there's this defense budget issue. Pete Hegseth explicitly told Richard Marles, the Deputy Prime Minister and Defense Minister, and then they put it out in public, that they want Australia as soon as possible to spend 3.5% of their GDP on defense. Australia is in no position to go there. And Mr. Trump is very unpopular in Australia. So Prime Minister Albanese loses nothing politically by pushing back in public. And not surprisingly, that's exactly what he's been doing. So the U.S. risks overplaying its hand with its closest allies in ways that will have blowback and get to a worse place than we are now.
So here's the thing, Evan. You know, some of this is Australia can't do what the U.S. would want or prefer. Some of it is Australia won't do what the U.S. would prefer or want, right? But, you know, and you've got a back history in government, so tell me how important this is. Is this a case of the Trump administration wanting Australia to pre-commit publicly? I mean, why can't this just be agreed to privately and you know, assuage concerns or increase confidence that way?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the short answer, I mean, the direct answer to your very direct question is yes, the United States wants Australia to pre-commit. But no, Australia is not prepared to pre-commit. And Mr. Conroy, the defense industry minister, went on television and reinforced what Prime Minister Albanese had said earlier, which makes clear that Australia will not do that publicly. That then comes to the second part of your question. Could the U.S. have handled this in a less public way? And my answer to that question is yes, it can and it should. But eventually, and this is what I've been getting at in some of the writing that you alluded to, the Australian public is going to have to be bought into this because this level of defense spend that the U.S. is asking for, and by the way, under the Labor government, the defense spend has been moving progressively upward, albeit not as fast a rate as the U.S. would like. The defense spend is going to have trade-offs elsewhere, particularly on social welfare spending and on other things domestically that are traditionally associated with Labor Party. The base Labor voter, many of whom voted to re-elect Mr. Albanese with a larger majority, are not bought into a lot of this stuff and into the full securitization of Australia's relationship with the United States and vis-a-vis China in the way the United States is seeking. So the U.S. has misread Australian domestic politics, needs to be a little bit more nuanced about that. But the good news, if I were sitting in the Pentagon, is the arc of Australian defense policy actually is moving in the direction the United States would like. So a little more nuance and subtlety could go a long way. No country is as skeptical of China these days, except maybe Japan, as Australia.